got a friend in me. Thank you.
The boy began to sing before she even realized she was crying. Diana Mercer wasn't the kind of woman who cried on the subway. She wasn't the kind of woman who cried anywhere anyone could see her. But there she was, on the Red Line in Chicago, on a Thursday at 6 in the afternoon, with her phone turned off in her lap and a 3-line message from a private investigator who charged $4,000 a month. And the tears had come without warning, in that treacherous way that happens when the body decides it's had enough. We've exhausted all available leads. The guy doesn't want to be found. She had read it twice, turned off the phone, and something inside her simply stopped holding back. The boy's voice was small but clear, a melody Diana recognized before she could name it, that kind of recognition that rises through the chest before reaching the memory. He was sitting beside her with 2 plastic bags between his feet, bags too big for arms that size, and he sang with the seriousness of someone carrying out a mission. 7 years old, perhaps, sneakers with crooked Velcro straps, dark skin, alert eyes, the upright posture of a child who learned early on to take up space without asking permission. Diana wiped her face with the back of her hand. The boy stopped singing. "You're still sad," he said. He didn't ask. No, she replied, automatically. The conditioned reflex of 40 years of pretending she was fine. The boy looked at her with the specific patience of someone who doesn't believe adults who lie about how they're doing. "You are," he said, "just like my dad when he sits by the window and stares at nothing." Diana didn't answer. At the bottom of her purse was a white gold wedding ring she couldn't bring herself to throw away or wear. And in those words, "My dad when he sits by the window and stares at nothing," something tightened with a precision she hadn't expected. She knew that look. She had caused that look. In the Gold Coast apartment, there was a kitchen that smelled of nothing every Thursday. It had smelled of nothing every Thursday for 18 months. Diana had learned not to go into the kitchen on Thursdays. The subway jolted. The lights on the Belmont platform flooded the car for a second, and then vanished. "My name is Marcus," the boy said, as if they'd been formally introduced. "You can call me Marcus." "Diana." "Okay, Ms. Diana." He carefully rearranged the bags between his feet. "Where are you headed?" Marcus didn't wait for an answer. He grabbed the bags, stood up from his seat with the determination of someone who already knows where they're going, and looked at Diana as if it were obvious she'd be coming along. "My dad's sick," he said, just like that. "I went to buy food and medicine. I know the way by heart. I won't get lost." Diana stood still for a second. The subway was slowing down for the next station. She was supposed to keep going to the Gold Coast, climb the stairs to her apartment, open a bottle of wine that had been open since Tuesday, and read the detective's final report for the 3rd time, as if the answer would change. "Let me carry that," she said. Marcus looked at her seriously. "You don't have to do that." "I know." He thought about it for a moment. Then he held out the heavier bag. "All right. But you work before you get paid. No advance payment." They got off at Fullerton Station. The October night had teeth. That Chicago cold that gives no warning, that simply appears around the corner. Marcus walked fast for short legs, and Diana found herself almost running to keep up, the leather bag slapping against her hip, the 3-centimeter heels more useless than ever. "You walk fast," she said. "You walk fast," she said. "You walk slow for an adult," he replied, without looking back. "It looks like something's following you." Diana almost smiled. She hadn't truly smiled in longer than she could remember. They turned 2 corners. Marcus walked without hesitation, the route obviously memorized in his body. The child who takes this path alone far too often. Diana glanced at him sideways, the jacket a size too big for him, the zipper stuck halfway up. On his left shoulder was a small embroidery, a pear blossom, white on navy blue, the kind that's done by hand. Diana recognized that embroidery. There was one just like it on a pillow in Raymond's apartment, made by his grandmother, which he kept even when it didn't match anything because he said it was the only object that smelled like the house where he grew up. She looked again. She blinked. She kept walking. Marcus stopped in front of a red gate, the paint peeling at the edges, and reached into his jacket pocket for the key. "This is it," he said. The house was small. Lights were on in the living room. Diana stayed outside the gate while Marcus pushed the gate open. "Dad, I'm home," he called, his voice rising up the quiet street. Silence. Marcus pushed open the front door, which was ajar, and went inside. Diana stood at the gate with the bag in her hand. It wasn't her place to go in. She was going to leave the bag and leave. That was what made sense. The embroidery on the jacket proved nothing. There were similar embroideries all over the world. Then she heard the thud. It wasn't loud. It was exactly the kind of sound a body makes when it falls without being able to hold on. A dull thud, without drama. Diana went inside without thinking. She crossed the small living room, the television on but with the volume off, a drawing of 3 figures stuck to the refrigerator, and reached the kitchen. The man was on the floor, lying on his side, breathing still but labored, his skin with that damp sheen of a high fever. Marcus was kneeling beside him with his hands on his father's cheeks, calling his name in a low, controlled voice, with a calmness no 7-year-old should ever have to possess. Diana dropped the bag. She knelt on the other side. She saw first the embroidery on the collar of his shirt. The same flower, made by the same hand, the same navy blue faded from heavy use. Then she saw his face. Raymond Foster. The air left her lungs all at once. The kitchen felt too small. The floor felt too hard beneath her knees. She placed her hand on his forehead, hot as embers, and her hand didn't tremble because she wouldn't let it. "Marcus," she said, her voice coming from somewhere below her chest. "Do you have a phone at home?" "Yes, in the living room." "Go get it now. If this story has hooked you this far, subscribe to the channel. There's much more to come." The doctor arrived 20 minutes later. Diana was at the kitchen door, and Marcus was by her side, silent, his knees drawn up to his chest. He hadn't cried. That was what weighed on her most, that restraint of a child who has already learned that crying doesn't solve anything. Dr. Catalano was a 60-year-old man with a black briefcase and a direct manner. He examined Raymond in silence, took his temperature, checked his blood pressure, and asked questions that Marcus answered precisely. 4 days of fever, it wouldn't go down. He'd put a wet cloth on his forehead just like his father had taught him, gave him water every hour. Diana watched the boy give those answers with a steady voice and serious eyes, and felt something shift inside her that she didn't want to name just yet. "Dengue," the doctor said, standing up. "We caught it early enough. His platelet count is low. Hospitalization would be ideal." "He's not going," Marcus said from the kitchen doorway. "He doesn't like hospitals. He says he never gets better there." Diana looked at Marcus. Then she looked at the hallway door. There was something about the word hospital that always shut something inside her off. A door she'd kept securely locked for 21 years. This wasn't the time to think about that. "Then the hospital will have to come to him," the doctor said. "But someone needs to be here full time. This child can't be the only one responsible." "I'll stay," Diana said. The words came out before the decision. But once they did, they were true. Marcus turned to her with that direct assessment he'd already made on the subway. "You don't have to," he said. "I know." He considered it. He nodded once, as if sealing a deal. After the doctor left, Diana called Crystal and canceled everything for the next day. Then she went to Raymond's room. 6 years older than the last time. Not in a bad way. In a real way. There was a history book on the nightstand with a bookmark made of folded cardboard, a child's handwriting in the corner. "Don't lose the page, Dad." There was a glass of water with a little note underneath. "Drink it all." Diana stared at that little note for a long time, a 7-year-old boy managing his father's recovery all by himself, with little notes and wet washcloths and the resolve of someone who has no other choice. She was in Raymond Foster's room after 18 months of being unable to find him, brought there by a boy with a familiar embroidery on his jacket who was likely her son, without having been invited, without having any rights to anything in that house, and unable to leave. What would you do in her place? Write it here in the comments. I want to know. The math was simple. She'd rather not do it yet. Marcus appeared at the bedroom door with 2 cups of tea. "Do you know how to make porridge?" he asked. "My dad likes it when he's sick." "I'll learn," Diana said. He nodded with the seriousness of someone accepting a verbal contract and intending to enforce it. "All right, I'll teach you, but pay attention because I'll only explain it once." Raymond woke up the next morning with a fever 2 degrees lower, and Diana sitting in the wooden chair beside the bed. He stared at her for a long time without speaking. Diana didn't look away. She had come too far to look away. "You're real," he said finally. His voice was hoarse from 4 days of fever. "I am." He said nothing more. He looked at the ceiling. He took a deep breath through his nose, with the slowness of someone carefully choosing his next words, or choosing not to say anything. Diana knew that silence. She had filled that silence with work for 5 years, until he stopped trying to fill it. "You can go," Raymond said. "Thanks for the doctor. I'll take care of the rest." "I'm not leaving." "Diana, I'm not." He turned his face toward her. There was something in his eyes that wasn't anger. Anger would be easier, but that harder thing that is old hurt that has given up on being heard. "Why now?" he asked. "Why not 6 years ago, when I was still there waiting?" Diana didn't have a good answer for that. She didn't try to make one up. "Because I was an idiot 6 years ago," she said, "and now I no longer have the luxury of continuing to be one." Raymond fell silent. Outside, Marcus was in the kitchen, the soft clatter of spoon against pot. "I didn't know," Diana said more quietly. "About Marcus. I swear I didn't know." "I know you didn't know. Why didn't you tell me?" Raymond looked at the ceiling again. When he answered, his voice was quiet, not cold, but settled in a truth he had clearly carried long enough for it to stop bleeding. "You were leaving anyway. Not all at once, little by little, and I didn't want to hold you back with that." The room fell silent. Diana opened her mouth. She closed it. There was no argument against that because there was no argument. There was only the fact, stark and inescapable, that he was right. "I took a test," she said finally. "Last night. I sent the samples to the lab." Pause. "But I already know the answer. I don't need the results to know." Raymond didn't answer. "I want to be in his life," Diana said. "I know I have no right to show up and demand that, but I needed to say it out loud." "You're going to have to ask him," Raymond said, "not me." That was when Marcus appeared in the doorway with a bowl of porridge and the look of someone who'd just overheard more than he should have, without meaning to. The 3 people in the room froze. Marcus entered slowly. He set the bowl on the nightstand. He stared at Diana with that weighing gaze, but this time it was different. Slower, as if he were recalculating something he had already figured out before. "You're my mom," he said. He didn't ask. He stated it, just as he had done on the subway with her sadness. Diana couldn't speak. She nodded. Marcus looked at his father. Raymond nodded too, slowly. The boy stood still for a moment Diana would never forget. That moment when a child silently processes information too big for the size of their body. Then he crossed the room, stopped in front of Diana, and raised his hand. With his thumb, he wiped away the tear she hadn't realized had slipped down. It was exactly Raymond's gesture. Exactly the same angle, the same tenderness. 7 years of a present father in a single small gesture. And in it somehow, she was there too. "It's okay," Marcus said. "You're here now." Diana placed her hand over his. There was nothing words could convey in that moment. If this story touched you, leave a like. It helps us keep telling stories like this. 3 days later, Marcus fainted on the way to school. Diana was at the Gold Coast apartment picking up clothes when the phone rang. An unknown number, a teacher saying the boy had fallen in the hallway and the ambulance was already on its way. Diana left without closing the door. She took the stairs instead of waiting for the elevator. She got into the car with the clothes still in her arms. Raymond was in the emergency room hallway when she arrived. Standing, paler than he should be for someone who had recovered from 4 days of fever less than 72 hours ago. "How is he?" "Stable, under examination." Raymond looked at her. "Dengue. He must have been bitten before I got sick. His fever was just starting, and I didn't notice." Diana nodded. She looked at the doors to the pediatric ward. She didn't go in. She stood in the hallway with her bag pressed against her body, her eyes on the doors that opened and closed with every passing stretcher. Raymond stood beside her without speaking. He waited. A nurse walked by with a tray. The intercom called for a doctor in a low, distorted voice. The doors opened. They closed. "I was 19, Diana said, without looking at him. "My mother was on the 3rd floor. I was in the waiting room. A doctor came walking toward me with that look, and I knew before he even opened his mouth." She paused. "Every time I walk into a hospital, I'm 19 again, waiting for someone to tell me she didn't make it." Raymond didn't say he understood. He didn't say it would be okay. He stood beside her in the same silence she had wasted over 5 years, and which she now recognized for the exact weight it carried. The doors opened. They closed. Diana kept staring at them. Inside was a boy who had drawn 3 figures in a picture because he knew, the way children know things adults can't explain, that someone was missing. A boy who had boarded a subway with bags that were too heavy and sung to a sad stranger because his father had taught him that music drives sadness away. A boy who had wiped her tear with his thumb without asking if he could. The doors opened again. Diana took a step. She stopped. She took another. Raymond said nothing. He didn't touch her. He just walked beside her at the pace she could manage. 1 step, pause, another step, until the doors closed behind them. Marcus was in a small bed with a bandage on his arm where the IV entered, a dinosaur sticker over the adhesive tape, and the slightly indignant expression of someone who'd rather be anywhere but there. When he saw Diana, the indignation eased a millimeter, just a millimeter, but she saw it. "I didn't pass out from fear," Marcus said immediately. "It was dengue." "I know," Diana said. "I just want to make that clear." "You have." She sat on the edge of the bed. Raymond stood on the other side. The doctor came in, explained, reassured them. 2 days of observation, a blood transfusion arranged, platelet count being monitored. Diana listened to everything, asked the right questions, took notes. When the doctor left, she realized her hands had stopped shaking. Marcus fell asleep an hour later, his IV arm outstretched, his face buried in the pillow with that complete surrender that only children can manage. Diana and Raymond stood on either side of the bed without speaking. The light in the room was yellow and dim. Outside, the hospital went on. Distant noises, footsteps, doors. Inside, there were only the two of them and the boy's steady breathing between them. If this story is really touching you, consider supporting it with a super thanks, or subscribe now so you don't miss the next ones. Marcus was discharged on a Tuesday morning with a white, cold sky that couldn't decide if it would turn to snow. He walked out of the hospital on his own, a matter of pride, it was clear, with Diana on one side and Raymond on the other, and his backpack on his back as if he were coming home from school. On the sidewalk, he stopped, breathed in the outside air with the solemnity of someone who had been trapped and now was no longer, and declared that he wanted pancakes. They went to a corner diner. Marcus ordered pancakes with maple syrup and orange juice and a banana on the side because, he explained, it was important to have fruit. Diana and Raymond ordered coffee. No one said anything important for a while, just the clatter of forks on plates, the TV in the corner, the steam rising from the cups. It was Marcus who broke the silence. "Mom?" he said. Diana looked up. It was the first time. He was looking at her with maple syrup on his chin and a completely serious expression. "Are you going to stay?" he asked. Diana set her cup down on the table slowly. "Yes," she said. "Even when it's hard?" "Especially when it's hard." Marcus considered this as he cut his pancake. He nodded with the seriousness of someone accepting a verbal contract and intending to hold her to it. "All right," he said, "but you're going to have to learn to make better porridge. Monday's was soggy." Raymond looked at Diana. Diana looked at Raymond. Neither of them said anything, because there was nothing that needed to be said yet, and they both knew it. And the fact that they both knew it at the same time was in itself a form of a fresh start. When they left, Marcus walked in front with his backpack on his back, and the two adults behind him. Diana looked at him. The sneakers with the crooked Velcro straps, the jacket a size too big, the determined stride of a child who knows his way around by heart. And she remembered the drawing stuck to the fridge at home with the red gate. 3 stick figures, an 8-pointed sun. She had looked at that drawing the night Raymond was on the kitchen floor, before she knew who the boy was, before she knew anything. And there was something about those 3 figures that had tugged at her heart, without her knowing why. Now she knew. Marcus had drawn that before he knew she existed. He had drawn 3 figures because it was the right number, because a 7-year-old who grew up watching his father sit by the window and stare into nothingness knows, without being able to explain how he knows, that someone is missing. Have you ever felt that? That absence you can't name but that your body recognizes before your mind does? Sometimes we spend years carrying an empty space without realizing it has the shape of a specific person. Thank you for staying until the end of this story. Seriously, you could have left halfway through, but you didn't. If this resonated with you, the next video goes even deeper. See you there.